Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this recorded version of BayWa's first town hall. A brief note before we get to the video, this recorded version does not include all of our speakers in a grid mode, as was seen by our live audience, where all the guests were up on the screen at once, so you'll just see our guests one by one. It's still great content, and we'll get those kinks worked out for the recording next time. And as a reminder, you can also listen to this webinar as a podcast if you'd like. Just go to solar-distribution.com and navigate to our magazine, Solar Review. Thanks, and enjoy the town hall. Welcome. We're so glad you could join us. This is the first of a number of town halls we're planning, and I'll talk a little more about that at the end. But we're also learning how to produce these on Zoom, and we're not perfect yet. We're using this as a new learning experience. But we're hoping this will be a great way to talk about the different challenges we're all facing and bring in voices from around the industry and share what's going on in our lives and our businesses and try and make this as much of a community event as Zoom will allow us to. So we hope you find these valuable. And so with that, I'd like to go over to our CEO, Boaz Soifer. He's going to say hello and give a few notes, and then we'll bounce over to Christine Owens, the VP of Marketing, to give a few remarks as well. So Boaz, thank you for joining us, and why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Tom. First of all, I want to say it's really an honor to be here with all of you. I see we have quite a few attendees. Thank you so much for making time today. And I'm really glad we can make this time to be together. I think that's one of the big themes for us at BayWa right now is connection. So I really appreciate it. First of all, I just want to say we are fully operational. Our warehouses are still up and running. Our team was already 70% remote before this happened, and even the non-remote folks worked from home quite a bit. So in terms of all of our team members having access to the information they need and being online and up and running, there was no disruption there. Let me just share a couple of thoughts about how we're adapting, and probably many of you relate to this. We're considering last week to have been week one. And for us, really, that was about getting organized. And there's a McKinsey report that we read right away about managing a business through disaster and through COVID-19 in particular. Happy to share that with you. And from that, we formed 5 task forces that we really spent a lot of energy setting up last week. And those were focused on people. And that first was about the health and safety of people, but then quickly also became about emotional health for our team. Second was liquidity. I know many of you are spending most of your time concerned with liquidity right now. Third was understanding supply chain and what the upstream impacts might be, what our inventory situation needed to be, et cetera. Fourth is staying close to our customers. We managed to touch base with a lot of you last week. We'll be touching base with a lot more of you. But of course, this forum is a way for us to try to do that more interactively and comprehensively. And the 5th task force was gathering information, which initially was very much about the spread of coronavirus. Now that's shifting more towards understanding what's happening in the macroeconomic view and, you know, how much of a recession are we going to have, et cetera. This week, while last week was really getting set up, this week is starting to be about execution. This town hall being an element of that. We have some ideas of what we might be able to do to help you, our customers, and to maybe even support the healthcare infrastructure during this time as well. We also want to hear from you. We want to hear your ideas about what we can do. So to just close out these comments, I want to tell everybody we're here for you. And we believe we'll get through this together. And together is a really important word in that. So thank you again for being here.
Great. Thanks, Boaz. And I'd like to bring up Christine Owens right now, and she'll say a few remarks. Good morning, Christine.
Wanted to make sure no dog barking slipped in while Boaz was talking. Anyway, good morning, everyone. And just to echo Boaz, thank you all so much for taking this time to join us. As Boaz said, we're very focused on communication, connection, and community as where we're spending most of our thought process, aside from even the business or some of those other things that are obviously also taking up time. And so there's just two quick things at the beginning I wanted to make sure I let you all know. One is that we are doing a daily updates on our COVID webpage. And if you go to the URL behind Tom's head, or actually kind of to his shoulder, solar-distribution.com, that is our website URL. And when you go to our website, just below the graphic image on the main page is a link to our COVID page, and we are updating that every single morning. So as Boaz said, we are fully capable right now in terms of operations, logistics, supply. All our staff is online, ready to help you with anything you need. And if any of that changes, that page is where we will be updating it. And of course, send emails and stuff too, but I know you're all pretty inundated with COVID emails these days. So wanted to make sure you know to keep an eye on that page if you need to know where things are at with us. And we're also, if we find out new information about grants or other things, I know there's a lot of sources for that information, but we're trying to curate and put a couple of the things that we think are most relevant and important on that page for you as well. And one other thing that will be coming up, we will be doing more of these town halls in the future, as Tom mentioned, so we hope you'll participate ongoing. We also will have a webinar coming up to talk about a program that we're going to be kicking off with UNIRAC. And they have a permitting service that they've been building up and rolling out, so that's helping you with design documents, customer acceptance, as well as the actual paperwork to submit. And I know in a lot of places, you're slowing down your operations, or the building office might be closed. If there's ways that you could use that service, we are going to be offering that service for free for the next month, and there will be more information. And if it's something you think you could use, I encourage you to join that webinar, which will be next week. And we're just finalizing the day and time. And as soon as we do, we'll get that notice out to everyone. So with that, Tom, I'll turn it back to you and we'll go on with the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Christine. So Boaz, I'd like to kick off the conversation with you and talk about the phrase, confront the brutal facts. This is something you brought up right away at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis. Can you talk about why this phrase resonated for you right away? And can you also talk a bit about being a CEO and what it's been like for you to steer the BayWa ship in these strange times?
Sure. So yeah, confront the brutal facts comes from Jim Collins' Good to Great. It's one of the things Jim Collins concluded that companies who outperform their competitors over decades, that's something that they do, confront the brutal facts. And for those of you who haven't read the book, there are some other interesting things that Jim Collins concludes about great companies. So yeah, as soon as this crisis started to manifest and we started getting a sense of how severe it might be, both from a health standpoint and an economic standpoint, I was reminded of that phrase. And I think it shows up on a lot of levels. If we don't react quickly in a situation like this, then we face existential threats to some degree as a society, and not just in our individual businesses. So yeah, I think the faster we can get to understanding to the greatest degree possible anyway, and accepting the situation that we're in, the more we're able to adapt. And I think one of the big lessons in this for me and for BayWa has been the psychological adaptation to the brutal facts has not been easy for us as leaders and for our teams. And I think there's a lesson in that for us societally. I read an article in HBR yesterday that we'll share with you about how what we're actually all experiencing is grief. Grief for the physical toll that we're experiencing, and also grief for kind of society breaking down and changing around us. And obviously the last stage of grief is acceptance. And the more quickly we can navigate to that stage, the more quickly we can deal as rationally as possible with the situation that we're in. So confronting the brutal facts, right, helps us get to acceptance more quickly. Obviously, denial, this is fine, business as usual, is one of the stances we might take early in the process. Bargaining, right, trying to fix it, figure it out. If we just understand these different rates and these different dynamics, we can adapt. Finally, acceptance. And what we're really accepting is a huge amount of ambiguity. And not accepting it is much more stressful than accepting it. So we've been working with our team a lot on that. And kind of our penchant for practicing mindfulness at work and doing yoga at work and things like that have really risen to the surface to support that. The other thing I'm really seeing, absolutely for business leaders, but I believe also for communities in general, is a heightened sense of connection. And I'm actually really gratified by that and believe that it's something that we can take forward with us beyond this crisis. But I've talked to more people in the last week and a half than I've talked to in the last 6 months, I think, about what's going on in their business, how they're seeing the world right now, how we can learn from them, how we might be able to share information, whatever. And I'm also having neighbors knock on my door and say hello, which is, I think, rare these days. So acceptance and connection are kind of the two lessons that we're taking out of this. And then I think leaders need to be thinking about reconfiguration, right? The industry is already different than it was 2 weeks ago, and it's going to be even different yet 2 to 3 months from now. I think a recession is very likely, at least that's what I'm hearing. It could be protracted. I know the stimulus that's released today has some interesting elements that are going to help us, but still how we think about our business needs to change. So again, confronting the brutal facts gives us the perspective to be able to do that, but we have to go through an emotional and psychological journey in order to get there, and I believe that can't be minimized.
Thanks, Boaz. So I'd like to change gears a little bit and talk about the industry response to the crisis. And I'd like to bring up Sara, our first guest, Sara Birmingham from SIA. Thank you very much for joining us today, Sara.
Hi, thank you.
Hi. So a big question on a lot of people's minds right now is what constitutes essential services. Can you talk a bit about the latest interpretations on essential services and how those are being applied to solar?
Absolutely. And before I start, I just want to start with a caveat that obviously this is a very rapidly changing landscape. And so the information that I'm sharing with you, look at it as a data point in a very, very fluid dynamic. I'm not providing any legal advice. Please consult, specific orders and counsel for guidance on running your business. But happy to share with you what the best thinking is. But before I get there, I just want to say that SIA has put together a website, and we are putting up all of our information up there. It's www.sia.org/COVID-19. And please, we're conducting a survey. We really, really need to hear from you all, whether you're SIA members or not SIA members, the impact that this is having on your businesses. Because as we do our advocacy, we really need to hear your stories. So even if you filled out the survey, if things change, please fill it out again. And we really appreciate your help with that. So Getting to your question in terms of essential services, the Department of Homeland Security is where most of the states are looking to for their orders on their stay-at-home or shelter-in-place guidance. And the Department of Homeland Services has updated that guidance. And we think that this new update has been beneficial in terms of making sure that it is inclusive of solar installation and development. And so the new guidance for essential workers, and I'm going to paraphrase and kind of put in the language that I think is most relevant to us, but it includes workers who maintain, ensure, or restore or involved in the development of expansion or operation of the generation, transmission, and distribution of electric power. And so what's new about that is they just added in the language about developing, expanding, or operating electric power services. And so we think that's pretty clear that that includes solar installation and development.
Okay. How is SIA balancing the health concerns with the desire to keep some of these businesses up and running?
I mean, that is the essential question. I think that, first and foremost, we all need to be aware that public health and safety needs to be the primary focus. But we also want to make sure that the solar industry and businesses are able to continue operating. And so we believe that businesses can continue to operate as long as it's not expressly prohibited by your specific state or local orders. And what we're seeing is you should, of course, be telecommuting as much as possible. A lot of solar industry folks are remote workers, and so that has been helpful. But make sure that when you are operating, installations or crews or anything like that, that you're practicing the social distancing that's recommended by the CDC. And we've seen some states have gone even further to be really, really specific. For example, in Nevada, they talk about that you should, restrict meetings, establish the effective social distancing protocols, provide sanitation and cleaning supplies, conduct daily surveys on changes to staff and labor health. And so, we think that as we're moving forward and more states are issuing these orders, hopefully they can look to some of these resources that have been out there so that we can really establish the safest, the safety protocols that are necessary.
Did you want to add something else? Yeah.
Yes, I want to add one more thing.
Yeah, of course.
I want to, sorry, I forgot something. There's just so much happening here.
Right.
I just want to make sure that it's crystal clear that in all of the states that we've looked at, door-to-door sales should be discontinued for the time being.
So like, as I mentioned, Sarah's going to stay on. So if you have questions for her or Sia, please put them in the chat window. And now we're going to go to a solar contractor. We're going to talk to Barry Cinnamon from Cinnamon Energy Systems in San Jose. Barry, thanks for joining us. Can you give me a quick summary of your last few weeks and what you're anticipating in the coming weeks and months?
The last few weeks, things have changed every other day. So a couple weeks ago, we started preparing for social distancing. We had plenty of sanitizers, masks for our employees, and which we had anyway, because sometimes they have to work in attics and crawl spaces. But then, the situation began to change pretty rapidly. So we're trying to maintain flexibility, and it's difficult to make the investments in time to figure out what exactly the plans are going to be when, we expected the situation to get worse over the next few weeks before it begins to get better in a month or two. So it's been very dynamic and a challenge there. 6 months out, I think we're going to be in the busiest installation time here in California. There's going to be a lot of interest in the backup power systems that we install. So it's a really tough balancing act to make the additional investments in our people, keeping people busy, keeping people employed, even though we may not be profitable, because we know we're really going to need that capacity later in the year, fourth quarter, third and fourth quarter. And as you know, in the solar industry, things are always really busy in the fourth quarter. This is going to have the decline in the ITC exclamation point. This is going to have the end of year rush exclamation point because of the fires we have. And also, I think there's going to be some pent up demand. So it's a juggling act.
Great. Boaz, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, Barry, I'm curious. We've been hearing in Northern California that demand for storage might be consistent or even increasing. Is that something that you're seeing, and is that something that you've heard of happening in other parts of the country as well?
I don't know about other parts of the country, but the demand here is very strong. And it's both for the backup power reasons and also because of the structure of the electric rates. And when you crunch through the numbers, it's kind of surprising, but adding a battery means that it only increases a simple payback by a year or two. The other surprise is that it has an inverse effect on the number of solar panels a customer needs to get to a zero electric bill. So in other words, you might have 24 panels to get to zero bill, but if you add a battery, that might go down to 20, which actually kind of helps with the payback for the battery.
Great. Thanks, Barry, for the update. And if folks have questions for Barry, just throw them in the chat window.
Just a couple other tips, Tom, just to
Sure.
talk about some things that we're doing as a contractor that may, and I just really love to hear these comments from people and suggestions. But one of the things we're doing with our employees is making sure that they only have one occupant per vehicle, so that they drive their personal vehicles, they get the mileage reimbursement, that's fine. Bring their lunches, avoiding fast food during the day, except for restroom breaks. The online sales calls really do seem to work pretty well. And then, the biggest dilemma, I think the biggest challenge we have here in Northern California is just the delays with permitting, inspections, and interconnections, because the AHJs and the utilities are not that responsive, and understandably so.
Thanks, Barry. So I want to jump over to the supply side of the conversation for a few minutes. So if you have supply questions, now would be a good time to toss those out there. I'd like to bring on David Dunlap and Daniel Marino, our VP of Operations, David Dunlap, and our Chief Commercial Officer, Daniel Marino. Thanks, guys, for coming on. David, can you give me a brief status report on BayWa's supply pipeline and logistics? And if folks are listening to this after the town hall today, like Christine mentioned, you can get an up-to-date status on the BayWa website. So yeah, David, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Right now, everything is pretty much business as usual, expecting to see the overall volumes and daily order count diminish as more and more installers working in lockdown areas give us the signal that they're suspending installation activities. I think that's really just starting to happen this week. As of last week, a lot of folks were still interested in receiving product and going ahead with installs and following those safe work practices for their employees. In the conversations with our suppliers, they're much the same way. The supply kind of disruption that we expected to be encountering when news of this first broke back at the very beginning of the year, mostly those delays or disruption patterns were actively being closed or minimized through resiliency kind of implementations in the supply chain. And US stock levels are healthy and things are still moving. Most of the suppliers, as well as our business model, relies pretty heavily on 3PLs for both warehousing and carrier logistics, and those are all still moving in pretty much all jurisdictions. The caveats will, of course, be around determination of essential practices or essential material hauling, as well as what is the actual capacity needed for those essential businesses. So as food and healthcare needs increase, we may have to give up some capacity, sort of generally speaking, when you're talking about available truckers or active terminals or those sorts of things, making sure that we're prioritizing health and food and essential. And then, but I still think that for the most part, goods are moving. So things are in good shape in that sense.
Great. Thanks, David. Daniel, can I get you to weigh in on how the supply-demand dynamics are evolving? What are you seeing?
Sure, thanks. From an inverter storage and racking perspective, we haven't seen any serious hiccups yet. The module story, however, is pretty different. When COVID-19 broke out in China, factories in Southeast Asia reduced output because of supply constraints from China in terms of backsheets, aluminum, etc. Now we're seeing COVID spreading in Southeast Asia. So in Southeast Asia, utilization of module factories had been 80% plus by early this month. And that's changing in Malaysia, for example, which is a major source of cell and module capacity. We're seeing factories closing for the past 2 weeks and at least another 2 weeks for the most part. So that's going to be a constraint on supply. The other two major production centers, which is Thailand and Vietnam, we're seeing potential outbreaks there as well. So all bets are off for the next few weeks from a Southeast Asia perspective. I think in the most likely case scenario, we'll see these factories ramp up again Q3, Q4. And yeah, big picture, things are murky for the next month or two from a supply perspective.
David, what are your conversations with suppliers like right now?
They're much the same as Boaz outlined at the beginning in terms of sort of building the trust battery even more than it already was full, relying on the open communication, transparency, and to a certain extent confronting the brutal facts. We know that as the installer base has to shut down and stop their installations in different jurisdictions across the US, that's going to result in a slowdown of the regular consumption rate of products, which consequently means that we need to slow down on our inbounds from the manufacturers. Nobody is talking about, doom and gloom, absolute shutdown, and, all bets are off forever. We're looking at it as a temporary slowdown or disruption and a shift of that demand curve. So everybody understands, at least our conversations today with all the major manufacturers, they understand that they will play their part in this, and the supply chain on the manufacturing side is a bigger beast and has longer lead times and more complexity, but they understand that they're going to have to kind of incorporate a certain amount of that absorption and shift in the demand curve to maintain health throughout the channel in the industry. If they try and just hit their monthly or quarterly numbers and stuff all the warehouses of all distributions companies now, that just means we're going to buy that much less in the future, right? So being on top of it now and making that adjustment in the near term is a better solution for all. And I think we're all aligned so far in that.
Okay, we got a question from Martha. What are the thoughts on pricing fluctuations?
It's too early to tell right now. I think that again, at the beginning, we thought that there was going to be a supply shortage, a supply constraint. Europe was desperately concerned for March and April inbound volumes. They thought there was going to be no product. And they now, because of the shutdowns and the limitations on the demand side, there's a potential of being too much product. So we kind of did, we sort of spiked and dropped on both the supply and the demand. The real question is, where does that balance out in the May-June timeframe? Right now, it's at least balanced in terms of what we thought the supply constraint was going to be, and now what the demand constraint is going to be. Do we come back out heavy on supply or heavy on demand is what we don't know, because we don't know what that time horizon that we're looking at is. Right. But I think Daniel and I are pretty convinced at the minimum right now, we're looking balanced. The opportunity for the demand side to be constrained for a longer drawn out period could well mean an overabundance of supply because of the, you know, the trick of trying to slow down that inbound supply. But as you just mentioned, if Southeast Asia, which is our primary module supply for US distribution, volumes of PV, if that actually is constrained, that would balance with the drop in demand that we're expecting to see.
Great.
Yeah, just to add to that, Tom, it's hard to say whether which force is more powerful short term, but it's almost certain we'll see back and forth through the year with pricing going up and down as we have supply and demand play off each other. Short term, it feels like there's a little bit of a surplus, very short term, of product in inventory. It feels like, based on the signals from Southeast Asia, there could be a constraint in let's say 3-4 months, followed by potentially a dramatic surplus towards the end of the year. So I'm expecting multiple fluctuations between that dynamic on price through the year.
Awesome. Thank you both for taking the time. And David and Daniel will be around for the rest of the session if you have questions. We do have more questions coming in the chat window. Barry, we're going to shoot a question your way in just a minute, and we're going to come back to Sara as well. But I want to bring on another contractor at the moment to talk to. So we've got Joe coming in from Ipsen Solar in the Mid-Atlantic. Joe, I believe you're in DC. Joe, what can you tell us about your experiences in the last few weeks and what you have coming ahead?
Well, I'd echo a lot of what Barry mentioned. The last 2 weeks sort of feel like 2 years. A couple weeks ago, we chose to go all telework. So all of our staff was working from home, and that worked out pretty well. It was the first time we had ever tried to do that, but we're utilizing Slack and Google Hangouts, and that seemed to work pretty well in terms of communication. But then last week we had to lay off about 10% of our workforce, which was hard. First time we'd had to really ever do anything like that. And that was a difficult moment. But then more recently, we decided to set on a 30-day furlough because we heard from a lot of our installers that they just weren't comfortable out in the field, that they didn't feel safe given the circumstance. And so we just kind of made the proactive decision to start a 30-day furlough. I know a lot of other companies felt like they could kind of keep going until there was a formal shelter in place, which there's not in DC, Maryland, or Virginia right now. But we just didn't feel comfortable sending our guys out in the field if they weren't comfortable being out in the field. So we're on a 30-day furlough. We know it could end up being longer depending on what takes place, but that's kind of where we are today.
Okay. Thanks for the update, Joe. Really appreciate it, and we wish you the best. So I'd like to bring Sara Birmingham back up. There was a question, I think it's a clarification question. I'm going back to it. And what was it? Yeah, what did Sia mean by sales should be suspended for the time being? The question Martha asked, she wants to make sure she heard you correctly and what that means.
No, door-to-door sales should be suspended so that you're maintaining appropriate social distancing.
Okay, great.
And try to just utilize as much web sales as possible.
Okay.
There's another question for Sara here, as long as we have her up.
Yeah, great.
Does anyone know if the wind solar credit got included in the COVID-19 Senate package? And Sara, you and I were talking about that earlier.
Yes, unfortunately, the extension for the tax credit did not get in the stimulus package that was passed this morning. We do know that there are a number of economy-wide provisions in that stimulus package, and we are eagerly awaiting a review and some information about what that includes. I don't think that this means that we're not going to be included. There is a lot of belief that there will be a stimulus package number 4, and we are lobbying hard to make sure that the ITC extension is within that stimulus package. So hope is not lost, but we are not in the package that was passed this morning. Thanks,
Sara. I'd like to bring Daniel back on the line. We have a question about tractor trailer routes. The question, Daniel, is, are you seeing any impacts to port functionality or tractor trailer routes or drivers?
Sorry, just to clarify the question, am I seeing an impact on basically logistics through trucking?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have tidbits and anecdotes that I hear from contractors around the country. In general, I am hearing more stories about drivers being fearful of driving and delivering goods. So there appears to be a shortage of drivers out there. So I heard rumors of a temporary, for example, shutdown at the port of Houston, but that then went away a day later. So there are some shortages. But it's just anecdotes so far, not a broader trend.
Thanks, Daniel. Boaz, to come back to the idea of furloughing and having tough conversations, do you have any advice for organizational leaders about having those tough conversations, whether they be furloughs or layoffs?
It's hard. There's nothing I can say that will make it not a tough conversation. I do think that there's the furlough conversation is actually relatively easy right now. And I mean, no, it's not easy. It's relatively easy because a lot of states, especially the ones that have disaster relief money, are putting backstops in place for furloughed employees to be able to collect their lost wages. I haven't read the stimulus package yet. That's on the list for tonight, but my understanding is that it skews heavily towards unemployment insurance and supporting employees that are out of work. So I think really I would encourage business leaders to confront the brutal facts. And if you have to make tough decisions about personnel, this is a very understandable environment in which to make them, and a relatively safe one for your employees. It doesn't make the conversations easier, but your employees probably have more of a safety net now than they would under normal circumstances.
Okay, great. I think I'd like to ask you more of a general question. You know, in these times of really high stress and ambiguity, what is your advice for leaders of solar companies in a time like this?
So I guess there are a few categories for that, Tom. One is, if you haven't confronted the brutal facts or are not very much in that process, that needs to be number one. And there are, I guess, three things I think we all need to work on urgently if we're not already. One is keeping our people safe. And that starts with physical safety, but then it goes to psychological safety too. For example, we've started doing a daily town hall for our whole company. It's just half an hour. Usually it's 5 minutes of, actually, we start with a 4-line check-in, which is a mindfulness practice. 5 minutes or so of updates, and then kind of popcorning around from one employee to another just to check in with each other. And our team members have said, this helps me feel connected. This is like therapy for me. I wouldn't miss this for the world. Thank you for doing these. Like, the amount of emotional support that people need right now is significant. And we can provide that for one another within our organizations. We shouldn't just assume people are getting that from their friends and family. We spend 8+ hours a day together. This is family too, to some extent.
Right.
Liquidity is the second one, right? If you're not planning your cash flow, modeling different scenarios, then you really need to be. This is not something that is going to pass overnight. Even if you think you have your coffers full, I guarantee your resources are going to be depleted. So I think that's really important. And on the heels of that, start applying now for federal and state support. Shore up the cash flow problem. And then number 3, stay close to your partners and your network. And we're here for that. We want to stay close with you. We want to hear what's going on and how we can help. But use your network too. Call your competitors. This is a time to get to know them. Ask how they're navigating. Ask if there's anything you can work on together. We're getting some requests from solar contractors who are turning their attention to trying to support healthcare infrastructure, especially in New York. are there things that we can do as a solar industry to support the very critical needs that are arising right now? So that's like one category, right? The brutal facts category. And then the other category is we're already hearing some input, including on this call, about how the solar industry is changing overnight. Remote sales, higher attachments for energy storage, communities coming together. Those are dynamics that are going to play a role in the next chapter of what the solar industry looks like. So thinking, if you have downtime to think now about what a future state might look like, I think it's time to dust off your strategy, to think about how you're differentiating, what capabilities you want to have in place for this next chapter of the solar industry, what your organizational structure needs to look like in order to support those capabilities, what are the key processes you can improve in your business in order to be ready for that new solar future, and how do you want to change your people practices. And I think people practices were already changing going into this, right? Employee engagement, distributed workforce, how we coach and mentor and check in with our people. All of that was very much in flux as organizations have become a lot more conscious in the last year or two. And I believe that's going to be even more the case coming up next. So how are you developing people? How are you ensuring that your culture is one in which your people can thrive? I think those are the things you can be working on for the next step. And once again, I just want to say we're here for that, to support you in that process. Anything you want to talk about as you're thinking about those questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thanks, Boaz. We got a comment as you were talking that says, Boaz, you are a true leader. And yeah, I do agree with that.
That's too kind. Thank you.
So I'd like to talk to another solar contractor now. We have Louis Woofenden from Net Zero in Tucson. Hi, Louis. Thanks for joining us.
Okay,
Nice.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
That's okay.
So similar to Barry and Joe, obviously handling a lot out here in Arizona. We don't have a stay-at-home order yet, though my guess is that will, I hope, come fairly soon. I think for us, it's really just been a lot of planning, obviously safety and so on, but really it's been about communication with our customers and communication with our folks here. So having those conversations every day about, do you feel safe? Making sure that they're taking appropriate safety precautions, multiple vehicles, and so on. And just making clear that to everybody that our families, our loved ones are our first priority, our community, and then we'll figure out the business piece all together as best we can. So I just feel like there's so much uncertainty right now, and it is just changing every day, and we are just trying our best to be present with our customers, our clients, and especially our teammates.
Great. Thanks, Louis. Have you guys given thought to starting work on remote sales? That's something that's been coming up a lot with people.
Yeah, we shifted to no physical contact with customers early last week and communicated that to the few installs that we do have going on. We are still doing site visits to get up on roofs, but we are not going inside customers' homes for sales or really for installation either at this point. It's a hard choice, right? Just to figure out where that line is, and we're just trying to do as much reading as we can of what the public health folks say and go from there. So.
Great. Thanks for the update, Louis. We really appreciate it. We're sending you the best.
Hang in there, Louis.
Thanks, Boaz. Thanks, Tom.
Now I'm going to bring on Kathy Swartz from SEI, or Solar Energy International. SEI works around the world with many different communities, training them on how to install solar. There you are. Hi, Kathy. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you, Tom. Thank you, everyone. And yes, I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about what Solar Energy International is doing in response to this. So we've been contacted by, and we're in touch with hundreds of companies, and what we've been hearing from you all is like, hey, we need to have training we need to have training for our folks during this time. And so what we did was in the last week, we really modified a bunch of our offerings to make it smoother and more affordable for you all. So while your folks may not either furloughed or they're working less hours, that you have some options. And for us, as Boaz was talking about, connection has been huge. It's a huge part of what SEI is doing in our response, both keeping us connected internally in that emotional support and making sure our operations are running as smoothly as possible, but also connecting with all these companies and folks that we're working with. So I'll just kind of mention just a few things that we're doing that may be something that you'll want to utilize for your employees. The first thing is we have a 20 hours of OSHA training, or OSHA funded PV safety training, and it's for residential systems and then also big ground mounted systems. And NABCEP recently approved that they would cover that, or they would accept that in place of the OSHA 10. So if you're having folks who will be applying for certification, you may want to send them through this training. It's not a replacement for OSHA 10 or OSHA 30, but it is, OSHA funded it, and it's specifically for PV safety. And we just really reduced the cost to basically just cover expenses, and it's $99 a person, regardless if you have one or 100. So we really just want to make it very easy, and it's on demand. You can take it at any time. We also, for a very long time at SEI, we've been doing online classes. And so we've added more online classes in because we've heard from folks that, hey, we want to get prepared, have our folks get trained up on storage or O&M, and now's a good time to do that. So we have an online session. They're starting April 6th. And we reduced all of the online classes, again, just to make it more affordable for folks during this time. And then also, in the interest of connection, we're doing a series of live webinars. There'll be 6 in English and 6 in Spanish, and they're about a variety of topics, everything from thermography and drones to energy storage, best practices, bypass diodes. So those are something as a way to just help, a very inexpensive way to, if your folks are looking for very specific training, and to have that connection with other people who are working in the field, we're offering those. And because we know that so many of you all are parents, probably many of high school students, we do a free introduction to renewable energy online class. So if you're looking for something to help your students, you can also have middle schoolers. That's available. And we'll be starting PV 101 online class for high school students, for those who want to learn a little bit more. So stay tuned for that. And if you want to, it's right on our website at www.solarenergy.org, or give us a call. We want to work with y'all. We want to help you through this, because we know that this is challenging times for all of us. So thank you, Benoit. Yeah,
thank you, Kathy. Really appreciate it. I'd like to get 2 other, let's pull up the solar contractors again. Let's get Barry on the line, and Joe and Lewis. We have some questions about what they're running into. Are contractors, are you having cancellations or postponements? Barry, why don't you kick us off there? What's your pipeline looking like?
The pipeline's dwindling. We have had cancellations. We have had postponements. So it's a little bit of a challenge. So I would say that, realistically, we look like we're going to be down by about half from where we were last year. And it's a challenge. When we have cancellations outside of the 3-day period, generally we're just refunding the customer the deposit money. We don't hold on to anything. Hopefully we'll get good recommendations down the road, but you can't enforce a cancellation, basically, so you might as well be diplomatic about it.
Right. Joe, what are you doing? What are you finding?
Well, we have a force majeure clause in our contract that we're trying to enforce. So we had, I think, only one person so far that wanted to cancel who was basically ready to install. We had purchased their materials and have their permits. So we're talking to them right now to see if we can find some accommodation. It may be at the end of the day that we have to use subcontractors, and so we're trying to sort that out. But we actually have a number of tools that we've been using the last several years, like virtual sales appointments. We have a whole setup for that, and we've been very successful with selling virtually. And we're also testing out, just in a couple hours, we're going to do our first virtual site survey. So we have a virtual site survey today and tomorrow, and we are creating some videos for our customers about what that looks like and how it works. And people have been very excited to test this for us because we've told them that this is something that we are looking to continue after the situation ends, to lower the price for everybody, speed up the process. So it's sort of a first try for us, but we feel like we have the tools to do that, particularly because we're using Eagle View for our final design. So we've got some contingency plans, and we're trying to turn a challenge into an opportunity however possible.
Yeah. I think those opportunity moments it's interesting to think about, like, might you go completely remote sales from now on? Now is a good time to maybe test that. Louis, what are you seeing? Are people pushing out their installs? What are you finding?
So we're definitely finding a lot less inbound traffic in the pipeline, but it has not stopped yet. People still are talking, and obviously we're shifting to not in-person appointments. We have not had residential cancellations so far. My expectation is that will likely happen coming up soon. We had one commercial job that was in kind of our development pipeline pretty far along, restaurant and bar industry. Obviously that's not happening anytime soon. So we'll just have to kind of see how it goes. And we're just kind of waiting for that shoe to drop, I think, in the next little while.
Right. Okay. Great. I want to start to wrap up here. So why don't we get Christine Owens on the line? I'd like to shift the conversation to a little bit of the forward-looking. Try to be as taking a moment to think about the opportunities that this might bring as well, as limited as our visibility is on those. But Christine, you and I have been talking about a few things, and I think there's a moment here to reflect on business as usual. So maybe can you talk about a few of the things you were thinking about over the last few weeks?
Sure, Tom. Yes, and thanks for this spot to help try and wrap things up. But yeah, and I'm sure it's on other people's mind too, and Boaz alluded to this as well, and Barry too, when he was saying 6 months out, the world will look so different than it does today, just like it looks so different just 2 weeks ago. And so we're all kind of riding this ride together. But something we've been talking about, and I can tell you in our exec team, I'm definitely more of a pragmatist than a dreamer. We leave that to other people. But that said, just a couple of weeks ago, some of us got to hear Paul Hawkins speak in person about his book Drawdown, which is about climate change and some genuinely actionable, practical things to do. And really underlying so much of his work and so much of the climate work is around collective action, which has really eluded us, especially in the US, I think. And certainly right now, we're all in the midst of a huge collective action. And so I think our, dream aspiration within our team is thinking beyond all of the crisis, which right now is, of course, taking over our daily life. But that I really see the potential for a future that's very, very bright for renewable energy. And the fact that we have such collective action happening now around the world, it gives me hope that we could put that to a different purpose when we get past the virus, and what that could look like for our industry. Certainly, it's so difficult now, but what's one of the things that I think is helping me personally get through, and that we've been talking about within our group, is what that long term might look like, and how there's maybe a new day to come when we get through the difficult times. So hopefully we can leave a little inspiration with everyone at the end here.
And I want to talk about a few of the things that we can do to help support those on the front lines. But as we close up our first town hall. Boaz, do you have any closing thoughts or remarks?
Yeah, I think brief ones. One is if you have ideas about how we can support the solar industry, we'd like to hear them, whether that's just supporting your company or the industry in general. Please reach out to us. Also, if you have ideas about how to support the healthcare infrastructure, especially in the most critically affected places right now, we'd love to hear about that. We're really good at managing information. We're really good at managing processes. We're trying to figure out how to apply that to supporting hospitals potentially overflowing. So if you have any ideas about that, please reach out as well. I'm sure, Tom, you're going to touch on this. We're going to keep this format going. I think it's something that we feel we can do to help create space for the solar community to come together. And we'd love to hear about what you'd like to hear about in this format as well. So we'll stay tuned for that. And yeah, I really appreciate everybody being here.
Thanks, Boaz. So I want to thank all of our guests for taking their time during this crisis to bring insights to the conversation. Thanks to our audience for your questions and your support on the Zoom platform. We wish you all the best. As Boaz said, you can reach out to us directly. BayWa is here for you. Let us know what you need. We will be doing more of these town halls. So we're already planning one for next week. And I want to shoot it over to our teammate, Krista Riggle, who has been helping on the back end production today. Thank you, Krista. And Krista's going to chat a little bit about some of the things that we can do to help support those in need right now. Krista, I think you've been bringing home quite a few dogs lately. Is that correct?
Well, only one so far.
Oh, just one.
A foster dog in our house. I don't want to make you guys too dizzy, but he's hiding behind my chair. And then we have two of our usual dogs here at the house. But with everything going on, I think it's important to remember that we have the ability to support one another through this. So the first thing that I want to talk about, the most important thing I think that we have is to do our best to stay healthy. So our hospitals are experiencing a big influx of patients and demand right now. So the most that we can do to stay healthy through practicing social distancing, washing our hands, not touching our faces, doing all of that stuff that we've been hearing about, I think is really important. The next thing that I think is really critical is to donate blood. So if you have heard anything from the Red Cross lately, they have a less than 5-day supply of blood. And they're at a critical need right now. So going out and donating blood is a really big way that people can help. If you look at the Red Cross website, they're talking about extra precautions that they're taking to make sure that people stay healthy as they come in to donate blood. So please do that if you are able. Another thing, related to the dog comment that Tom teed up for me is when people get sick or when there are economic issues, a lot of people start to surrender their pets because they can no longer take care of them. So if you have the space to foster, whether it's a dog or a cat or anything, think about doing that. There are a lot of shelters that are filling up right now. And if you have pets, come up with a plan for what you would do with them if you do get sick and you have complications. So find a buddy that can help you take care of your pets. And then the last thing, there's just, depending on the area that you're in, there's so many things that people can get involved in to help. So one of our coworkers, Scott Snyder, did a quick training for Meals on Wheels. So he's delivering Meals on Wheels once a week because most of the delivery people that they have are elderly or in high risk groups, and we need people to feed others. So there's that. There are also things that people are doing with helping get medication or groceries for people in high risk groups. Anything even like making masks for local hospitals. So if you have 100% cotton, making reusable masks is helpful. The hospital here in town actually just put out a call for masks, and they have drop sites throughout the town. So there's a lot I think that we can do to support one another and really bring a sense of community after going through all of this.
I just want to say real quick, Tom, for anybody that didn't get their question answered, we're trying to capture those so that we can put information on our website to address some of those questions, and we're not ignoring them.
Yes, thank you for adding that. Thank you, Krista, for ending us on that a supportive note. And thank you, everybody. Stay tuned for the next town hall. We will see you soon. Thank you, Boaz, for taking the time.